How's it going, everyone? I'm Jakejames Lugo, and welcome to the channel, where you'll find some of the most fair and honest game reviews out here. And nothing fancy this time, this is the third game that we're diving into for the BioShock series, BioShock Infinite. And all we need to know, is this a good threequel, or does it suck? So let's find out together, shall we? So how do you keep a series going successfully when you reach the third entry for it? Do you repeat what worked before, or try something different? Irrational Games and 2K decided to shoot for the sky, quite literally here. BioShock Infinite continues the BioShock series in an ideal city floating above the clouds named Columbia. Unlike in the previous games that took place in Rapture, a claustrophobic city underwater, Columbia in BioShock Infinite feels much more open. It's like you have a ton of room to freely move around. Anyway, the story follows a guy named Booker DeWitt, a private investigator hired to find a girl named Elizabeth within Columbia and bring her back to his employer. Doing so will wipe away his debt if he finds the girl. But as he gets into Columbia, he realizes things are super weird and completely not what he expected. Things only get weirder when Booker finds himself on the run with Elizabeth, being chased by the delusional inhabitants of Columbia under the direction of Father Comstock. I won't get into any more spoilers here, but let me tell you, things get even more weird beyond that. If you've played the previous two games, you'll be surprised at what goes down. But does that mean BioShock Infinite is a good third entry for the series? Or have things truly gone off the rail here? You'll definitely be surprised at what you discover.
Hello. Hey! Knock it off! Stop it! Will you stop it? Not here to hurt you.
Who are you?
My name is DeWitt. I'm a friend. I come to get you out of here.
Get away!
So if I'm being honest, I actually like Columbia as a city in BioShock Infinite as opposed to what we got with Rapture with the first two BioShock games. It's a very different approach and a completely different environment that still has some of the similar vibes that you got from BioShock 1 and 2 without some of the more horrific, crazier things, or at least feeling of isolation that you felt in Rapture. That's probably the one negative I can't say about Columbia, but as far as it being different and something entirely new, if you were looking for that, you definitely got it with BioShock Infinite. The other thing about Columbia is that the setting for it is like an early 1900s like American idealized city, which is pretty cool, but what I like is that they don't shy away from some of the more crazier, more horrific aspects of that era, including some elements of racism which are literally right in the forefront at the very beginning of the game. I wish they maybe explored it a little bit more, because they do have some explanations for certain things in the game that you could see throughout as you're playing, but still, it is cool that they tackled it in a very tasteful way without ever glorifying those aspects from that era, but also not undermining that it was still part of that era in the first place. The other thing too is that I actually like Booker DeWitt and Elizabeth as characters. I love their banter and the way that they kind of talk to each other throughout most of the game, even though I do still feel like Booker DeWitt is a little one note in a couple sections. However, once you actually get him and Elizabeth together and they start talking to each other and trying to figure things out as they're spending time and fighting alongside of each other, things work out very well. I remember the marketing for this game where it was actually those two at the forefront. They were really pushing them out there and everybody loved them, especially after they played the game. So at least these two characters, the ones you spend the most time with, are really well done. It's funny too, because if you did play the first two BioShock games before this one, you can see a lot of parallels between that main character that you play as in those games and Elizabeth with the little sisters. I won't spoil anything because there's a lot of big things that happen, but you could definitely see where they were going with this and at least some of the things that they kind of put in close proximity where you could connect the dots. It's very interesting and very well done. So even though the setting and the characters are pretty interesting in BioShock Infinite, what about the gameplay? Does it hold up well compared to the first two games? Because there's a lot of people that love BioShock 1. Is it as good, if not better, than those games? It's not a crazy thing to say that BioShock Infinite is very similar to the first two games, but this time, you're accompanied by Elizabeth for the majority of the experience. For some, she'll be a hit or miss depending on how much you enjoy playing through first-person shooters. Elizabeth will help you out by tossing you ammo, health, and salts to keep you fighting, but if you get shot down, she'll also bring you back to life right where you left off. Although I wish she was able to attack enemies with you. She doesn't really do anything when it comes to dealing damage to enemies that are nearby. Elizabeth also doesn't get attacked by enemies either, so most of the time, you're the moving target that they focus on. However, you could direct her to open things called tears later in the game, which make helpful items and stuff appear. She can even make friendly enemies show up to help you out in combat, which can be a big asset for some of the tougher battles. Overall, she's not that helpful in actual combat, but she does have an impact on how you approach most shootouts within the game. Some of the new additions to BioShock Infinite are pretty interesting. Booker and Elizabeth can use their skyhook to ride the rail system that flows throughout Columbia. You'll grapple onto a rail and go swinging around the area, letting you reach new locations and get the drop on enemies. You could even use the skyhook to execute staggered enemies or attack them from above for massive damage. It's a neat tool that reminds me of the Big Daddy drill, but with a lot more versatility. Of course, what's a BioShock game without plasmids, right? Only in here, they're called Vigors. These give you the powers that you'll recognize, with similar effects from the previous games. However, I found myself not using Vigors in the same way that I did Plasmids. I wasn't looking for environmental hazards to damage enemies, as opposed to just hitting them directly with them. This could be due to how open the environments are in Columbia, but don't expect to be igniting oil to burn enemies as much as you did before. You'll often just hit them directly with a Vigor and then shoot them afterwards. In addition to this, not all the Vigors are one-for-one with the Plasmids of previous games. There's less powers to obtain here, capping off at 8 Vigors within BioShock Infinite, while in the previous games had 11 Plasmids. We're getting less in here, so it may or may not be a big loss for some people. So I like all of the different weapons and the Vigors that you could find throughout BioShock Infinite, and I also like that you could upgrade all of them for the most part. But there's one thing that I did find annoying throughout my time playing the game, and that's the fact that you don't always get a lot of money to spend on all these upgrades. I always felt like I was strapped for cash, even though I was exploring every single part of Columbia, I was looting every enemy and every little location I came across, but I never felt like I had enough to get every single upgrade, or at least get every Vigor that I wanted that I was using frequently to their maximum capabilities, because you needed to spend a lot of cash in order to get this stuff. Even though, again, you could loot the different vendors, you could find all the different safes, you will always feel like you needed more cash at some point. At the same time, you're getting all this different equipment that you find in various locations, but not all of them were really all that helpful. I only stuck with a few pieces of equipment that really boosted up not only my melee attacks, but also some of my Vigors, or at least, elements of my Vigors that I was using very often, and it felt like I just had no need to change up some of my equipment. I had one loadout, and that's what I stuck with through the majority of the game. It's weird, especially when you're finding all this different equipment. I feel like, maybe they could have had something to upgrade the equipment themselves, or at least mix it up enough that the effects of certain equipment were much more better in certain scenarios than the ones that I had, because as is, there was no need for them. They were just kind of there and they just took up my inventory. So I get it, it's cool to have extra equipment, but you gotta handle it a little bit better than this. One other thing I do want to mention is that there's no upgrades or things that you could change up with Elizabeth herself. She doesn't get any, extra equipment. She does change her outfit, midway through the game, but it's not like stuff you could control. You're not going to give her, any sort of equipment. You're not going to give her specific Vigors. She's just there to help you out in a certain capacity, and that's it. You don't really control her beyond that. It might have made a little bit of sense that if you're going to be messing with this equipment or not use the majority of it, maybe give some of that equipment to her and maybe she could utilize it in some way. But I don't know what the mindset was of the developers. It just felt like, all that stuff was there and not being used. Why not use it for her? Or at least, why not find a clever way to give her something a little bit more that influences the way that she acts in combat, the way that she helps you out, some of the bonuses and other stuff that she does throughout combat. It just felt like there could have been more there and something to really tinker around with. But alas, that's just me. Maybe I'm being a little nitpicky here. And speaking of taking things a little further, what about this extra content, right? Because we got some extra content in BioShock 1, and we got a little bit in BioShock 2. But with BioShock Infinite, it's kind of different. So here's the funny thing about BioShock Infinite. You don't get a lot of extra stuff for completing the main game. You do, however, get to see some downloadable content, which comes in the form of Burial at Sea Episode 1 and 2, as well as Clash in the Clouds. But without looking at those for a moment, you don't find much once you finish the game. There is a 1999 mode that offers a harder difficulty to play through, but that's not something I would say is a big reward. At least not in the same way that BioShock 1 had the museum for you to look at all the game's enemy models and other stuff. I'd rather have that, to be honest. Once you finish the main game, that's about it. BioShock Infinite also doesn't have an alternate ending like in previous games. There's only one outcome no matter what you do. It's a shame because it would have been neat to see that continue from before. I would have been happy to see the decisions that you make in here at various different points have a much bigger impact, much like throwing the baseball at the couple during the start of the game. Those decisions do have outcomes that you could visibly see as you play through, but their overall influence on the greater story is practically non-existent. They kinda just happen and that's it, nothing beyond that. It would have been really sweet to see those things come back in some way and change the ending directly, but alas, we don't get that in here.
Elizabeth, you...
Promise me.
I will stop him.
That is an oath you cannot keep. But promise me that if it comes to it, you will not let him take me back.
It won't come to that. All right?
Because there's not a lot in the main game as far as extra content, let's talk about this DLC, because the majority of people that talk about BioShock Infinite say that the Burial at Sea DLC is the best part of this game. The other thing about this, though, that they really don't mention is that if you're not really into BioShock Infinite or you don't like the majority of the main game, I don't think you're really going to dive into the Burial at Sea DLC, let alone Clash in the Clouds. And the main thing is that even though I know that Burial at Sea is really good, I played through that DLC like twice, both episodes, especially if you're a big fan of like BioShock in general, and especially the first two games. It's very cool to see Rapture thriving like before everything goes crazy, right? The problem is, though, is that if you're not into everything in the main game, you're not going to spend money on this DLC. And Clash in the Clouds is like that arena type of DLC, that arena extra content that you did see in the first two games. But again, if you're not caring about all this stuff in the main game, you're not going to care about Clash in the Clouds, especially if you don't like the combat as much as the previous games or just don't like the combat of BioShock Infinite. It's just something that I feel like it's an excuse to kind of give this game a pass a little bit. And there's nothing wrong with that, especially for people that really like this game. But I don't feel like in order to get the maximum enjoyment, or at least get the right amount of enjoyment from a particular game, you need to go get all the extra DLC. To me, that feels like a little bit of a cop-out, a little bit of an excuse, and even though I like BioShock Infinite for what it is, I still don't think that that's a right excuse to give to someone that maybe has never played BioShock before, or maybe is just curious about this game, has never touched it before, especially if they were kind of dour about the first two games. With that said, however, I will say that it is cool to see a lot of the big story beats have a lot of parallels with the first two BioShock games if you play through episode 1 and 2 of Burial at Sea. There's a lot of connections there that if you wanted to see more kind of, connecting the dots between Infinite and parts 1 and 2, you're definitely going to get that here. Again, you're going to see things literally in front of you that I don't want to spoil unless you actually play the DLC, that you'll be like, okay, now everything makes a little bit more sense. Everything kind of comes full circle here for these three games. Now, I know there's a lot of fans of this series out there, but let's be real about all of this. Can I recommend that you play BioShock Infinite on any platform? I think that the game is good for what it is, but I don't think I would recommend this to everyone outright. I'm more quickly to say that everybody should go play BioShock 1 before they play this, especially if you've never played a BioShock game before. I think fans of this series will get the most out of this game, especially if you get the Burial at Sea DLC for the extra story. But taken on its own, this game is just okay, not as great as its predecessors. Does that mean that it's terrible? Absolutely not. But I don't think you'll be losing out on too much if you decide to play something else.
Elizabeth.
This is all I had.
Listen.
How do you do it?
How do I do what?
Forget. How do you wash away the things that you've done?
You don't. You just learn to live with it.
So there you have it, everyone. Those are my thoughts about BioShock Infinite on multiple platforms. I played this game on the PS5, but it's the PS4/PS3 version from the BioShock collection. It has all the DLC and it's probably the best version you could get of the game right now. I get where everybody comes from when they talk about BioShock Infinite, but I still feel like BioShock 1 is the far superior game, and that would probably be the game that I would recommend the most, if not the fastest, over something like this. I feel like you have to play through the first two games to really appreciate what's happening here. And the funny thing is that a lot of BioShock fans might disagree with me on that, or at least disagree with me on some of my views about Infinite and some of the things I criticize, but I think we all can agree that BioShock 1 is a much better game. That game is iconic for a number of different reasons, and it does a lot of things better than BioShock 2 or BioShock Infinite. But of course, like any other game that I review on this channel, that's just my opinion about BioShock Infinite. Let me know your own thoughts about this game down below in the comment section. Tell me, are you a BioShock fan? Do you like first-person shooters? What are some of the other game series out there that you know of that have a really awesome third entry of the series that's better than everything else? Or maybe one that still hasn't really lived up to the legacy of one of their first games that they've done, even though they probably had like a bunch of games afterwards. Talk to me about that stuff down below in the comment section. Hey, thank you everyone for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it enough to check out some of my other videos I'll list here on the side in just a moment. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel to see new content that I post up as it goes out. You can also join my Patreon for early access to new videos and exclusive content you'll only see over there. Don't forget to join my Discord server via the link in the description too. There's a lot of great people who love gaming and make an amazing community in there that I know you'll love being part of. Hope to see you again real soon. Peace out and stay epic, everyone.